Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Horsepower Obsessed. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the C8 mid-engine Corvette and about the big horsepower it's going to be making. Alright guys, so I'm going to get right into it. One of the biggest pieces of information I've read online recently about the C8 mid-engine Corvette is something that is totally mind-blowing when you really think about it. And that is the C8 mid-engine Corvette literally twisting the frame that it's built on due to how much power the top-end ZR1 equivalent is making. Now, as many of you know from my previous videos and from stuff you may have read online, the ZR1 engine is going to be a twin-turbo V8, putting out close to or around 1,000 horsepower. Now, that number by itself is just totally insane. That is a ridiculous amount of horsepower to have in a car, period. But GM is actually having a problem building a frame that will actually maintain this amount of horsepower. Now, there are some rumors that have recently surfaced that are stating that the biggest reason for the delay of this car, as we all used to think, was electrical issues. It's now being stated that it's because Chevy is having trouble finding a frame that will keep up with the engines in this car. There have been a couple different reports that stated either the frame was twisted or that the torque actually fractured the rear glass that covers the engine in the mid-engine design. Now that, like I said, that is just totally insane, that this car literally creates that much power and creates that much twist on the frame that it's gonna fracture that rear glass. An article over at thedrive.com actually specifically states that the problems are allegedly not limited to those digital, but also those mechanical. Prototypes fitted with the twin-turbo V8s producing between 900 and 1,000 horsepower have reportedly suffered from structural distortion so severe that the engine compartment's glass hatch was breaking. These are in line with the previous rumors which claim that the C8 will use a twin-turbo V8 to achieve hypercar-like performance with acceleration so frightening that GM has supposedly consulted with lawyers about potential risk of selling something so fast. Now, that by itself is insane. Like I said before, this amount of horsepower is totally nuts, but whenever you are literally redesigning your frame to handle the power is just totally crazy. Now, to really put it in perspective, you really have to think about the C7 lineup. The biggest thing that GM pushed with the C7 was that the frame was so rigid and so strong that it literally could handle the power of that car, all while offering a targa top and a convertible option. Now, that is all the way from the Stingray, Grand Sport, Z06, all the way up to the ZR1. So literally, the frame in that car for 750 horsepower could still handle that power with a targa top or a convertible top option. Now, when you really start to think about that, that is a 755 horsepower car that has no problems with the frame. So this tells me that the frame that they're using in that C8 Corvette, it would have to be a copy and paste design for the most part. Obviously, the C7 is a different engine placement than the C8, but GM already had a good idea of how to design a frame to handle 755 horsepower. So if this one is twisting or shattering the glass in the rear, then we're looking at a car that is producing well over 755 horsepower. As we've known, the rumors have suggested a 1,000 horsepower model of this car for at least close to a year. Now those rumors are starting to look like they have some merit to them, because now we're having a car that's creating so much power, it's twisting the frame and breaking the rear glass. So we have to be at something over 750. Like I said, GM has an idea, a really good idea apparently, of how to design a frame to handle at least 755 horsepower. So if this one is not able to handle it, we're looking at a car that has over 755. And that is totally mind-blowing. Now, there is a good chance, based on rumors that I've read, that the C8, especially this top-end model, with possibly all-wheel drive, 1,000 horsepower, all the good stuff, is going to be well over 3,600 pounds, possibly even pushing into the fours. And if that's the case, you're really going to need a lot of horsepower to move that thing as fast as you want to move it. So it does kind of make sense on one hand, but on the other, I really, really, really hope they do find a way to reduce the weight, because that is too heavy for a mid-engine car. Now, over at the Haggerty.com website, they go on to say that there was a couple different dates that this C8 was supposed to make an appearance that we obviously missed. And they did some digging and came up with an inside source of knowledge that gave them 3 good reasons as to why this car has been delayed. Number one, we've already heard. It is electrical issues. Now, to basically elaborate a little bit more, it wasn't necessarily that they were running into electrical fires or anything like that. What they're running into is literally a car that is completely different from anything they've offered before and has a lot of electronic components to it. And they are basically shifting to an all-new electrical architecture, and this is obviously leading to growing pains. The Haggerty.com website goes on to say that that means that there is 100 or more computer modules per vehicle that communicate on what's called a CAN, Computer Area Network, bus. Engineers are having difficulty working the bugs out of the Global B party line serving the Corvette and other new models. So again, this is something that is all new for this car, but probably going to be shared in different models throughout the GM lineup. Now, like I said, that's not necessarily a huge brand new issue. It is just a little bit more clarification on the electrical problems that they were having before. Now, the second issue is one we just talked about, is the distortion of the aluminum space frame experienced during testing a prototype equipped with 900 to 1,000 horsepower. We already kind of touched on this, but it is still just something that is totally crazy, and it tells me odds are very good this second issue is the main reason we haven't seen this car yet. The electrical stuff and the third issue we're going to talk about here in a second isn't anywhere near as important as this. They're basically beefing up the frame to handle this power, and that same frame is going to be spread out throughout the entire lineup of the C8. So it doesn't matter if you get the base model C8 or the top dog ZR1 1,000 horsepower model, you're going to get that same beefy frame. They're looking at a way to fix that frame, beef it up to handle the 1,000 horsepower, and then share that same frame throughout the entire C8 lineup. So this isn't an issue that they can necessarily wait on and fix later, launch the car now and then fix this for the high top dog model later. They want the same frame in every one of the C8 models. I can't blame them for that. It would definitely save on production costs as well as any kind of warranty work. So it makes sense that that is one of the biggest reasons that this car has been delayed. Well, issue number 3 is kind of unclear, so I'm going to quote directly from the Haggerty.com website. They go on to say that item number 3 is some unspecified bone of contention between those who design Corvettes and the development engineers who steer them to the far corners of the performance envelope. It could be a visibility issue, some ergonomic shortcoming, or a cockpit design problem. Unfortunately, our sources won't reveal the specific details underlying this concern. Now, to me, there's a couple different things that I could possibly put this on. And one of them is the steering wheel. Obviously, whenever they released the pictures of the interior, there were a lot of people that were displeased with that steering wheel. And if that is a problem, that's something that needs to be fixed before the actual release of this car. Now, I'm not saying that that is literally the only thing. There could be 100 things that are causing that. That might just be one of them. But with issue number 3 being as unclear as it is, it could be a lot of little things that need to be tweaked and changed before the release of the car. But I'm sticking to my point that number 2, the frame issue, is definitely the reason we haven't seen this car yet. And the last piece of information I've come across in the last week here on the C8 mid-engine Corvette is some new pictures. 2 pictures to be exact, kind of more detail and closer up images showing this car on a track testing. One of the first things I noticed about this picture is some of the camo and protective garb has come off the front end here. And one of the most notable pieces you can see is the front driver's side grille protecting what I assume is probably a heat exchanger behind it. It is a very similar design to the grille we find on the front end of the C7 ZR1. Now, obviously, GM has kind of learned from their mistakes with the Z06 and realized they need to load this car up with cooling to keep it cool on the track, especially if this is the model that's making 1,000 horsepower. I think it's interesting that grille in the front looks very similar to the one from the ZR1. It's definitely going to have a lot of cooling radiators up front. And if you look pretty close down there again on the driver's side, you can see that enough of that camo has come off to reveal what the color of the car is underneath there. It looks like it could be the Elkhart Lake Blue that made its debut appearance on the C7 Corvette just recently. Definitely cool to see the color of this car shining through. That's the first bit we've seen yet of the actual color on this car. It's pretty cool. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the comment section down below. If you liked what you saw, give me a big thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you as part of the Horsepower Obsessed community, so please do. And as always, guys, I'll catch you in the next one.